So we're continuing our discussion about how to find slope given different things. If I'm given a graph, we can place the dots that we see on the graph, but make sure that they fall on a grid mark, and then we can count the rise and the run. The other problem that sometimes occurs is that in some instances, we are given, instead of a graph, we're given 2 points. So we're given 2 coordinates. And those coordinates are the coordinates of 2 points that lie on those lines. And you'll notice here on the outside it says x1, y1, and x2, y2. That's because there's 2 points, so we have 2 x coordinates and we have 2 y coordinates. If you understand the graphing situation here, you understand that there is a difference between the y value for this one and the y value for this one. They're 5 away from each other. And you also understand that the x values are also a difference between them. They're 3 away from each other. So we use a formula called the slope formula because the rise is always found by finding the difference between the y values, and the run is always found by finding the difference between the x values. So the rise can be defined as the difference between y2 minus y1 over top of the run, which is x2 minus x1. Now technically, it does not really matter which variable you put first. I could put y1 minus y2 and x1 minus x2. I just can't start from a different point. I got to pick which point I'm going to begin from and keep the x and y consistent when I'm moving from that point. Okay? So personally, I like to pick the x1, y1 and x2, y2. I have to subtract the value of y1 and x1. That's what comes second. So I always like to look for an x1, y1 value that's not negative. So if you look at my example over here, this value right here, this 4, 2, doesn't have any negatives. So let's make that my x1, y1, and let's make this one my x2, y2. And then I'm just simply going to plug those into the formula. So y2 is negative 2 minus y1 is 2. x2 is negative 2 minus x1, which is 4. So if I do the subtraction, negative 2 minus 2 is negative 4. Negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. Now this fraction has 2 negatives. 2 negatives always cancel each other out. So this is going to turn to a positive. And then 4, 6, remember it's got to be a ratio or a fraction in simplest form. So this 4, 6 is going to reduce to 2/3. So the slope of a line that passes through these points is 2/3. Now, it wasn't graphed. I could graph these, but that would take a lot of time and you'd have to have graph paper. So knowing how to do slope formula is a quick and easy way of finding the slope without actually having to do a graph and count the rise and the run. All right, so the last example, and then we haven't really talked about slope-intercept form yet, okay? But we're going to talk about it now, and then we'll talk about it again later, okay? If we are looking at the equation of a line that is in slope-intercept form, this is slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. We are automatically able to identify the slope just by looking at the equation, because when an equation is converted to slope-intercept form, this variable m represents the slope. Now the variable b represents the y-intercept, which will help us later when we're graphing, but for right now we're just worried about finding the slope. All we have to do is to look at the number in front of the x. That's the slope of the line. So if I am given an equation, and I'm going to have you write this in your notes. If I'm giving an equation like this, and I want it to be in slope-intercept form, I need to solve this equation for y. So in order to do that, I am going to add the 7x to the right side, so it goes away from the left side. And then I have this, and it's still not solved for y, so I'm going to divide by 2. But every term on the right side has to be divided by 2 because there's 2 terms over there. So that's going to leave me with a fraction of 7/2 x plus 8 divided by 2 can simplify. So here's the equation in slope-intercept form. If it's in slope-intercept form, all I have to do is look at what's in front of the x, and that's the slope. So the slope equals 7/2. So as long as you will learn, and you're going to learn this again too, we're going to do more practice examples. As long as you learn how to convert something to slope-intercept form, you can quickly and easily identify the slope. The problem is you might not be given an equation at all. You might be given a graph, like this first example, or 2 points. So it's not going to be easy to identify the slope from those, but an equation is very easy to identify the slope from. Okay, so there's 3 ways to identify slope, and we're going to be using that a little bit more as we move through some of our other forms. So we'll move on to point slope form in the next video.